Connor, in thinking about what we're going to discuss today, I want to ask you, what has the time been that you really were like, I don't know if it's too dramatic, but fearful for your life? Like you thought, this is going to end horribly for me.
Sure. So I would like to pretend that it happens every week, that I'm like such an adventurer that I'm just constantly finding myself in situations like this, but that's not the case. So let me cast you back, Jason. At this point, almost 10, 11, 12 years, I was probably been about 13, 14 years old. My parents had gone out of town to visit my brother who had just gone to college. And so the only people who were home were my older brother who was around 21, and my little sister who was maybe about 10 years old. And so we live out in Jinx. It was a little less developed at that time, and I had a basketball game out in some podunk, like 30, 40 minutes north of or south of Tulsa. I don't even know where it is anymore. And so my brother and my sister, we go to this game. I'm sure we win because I rode the bench, so I was pretty good. So if I rode the bench, you knew we were really good. And so it's late at night. This is really before like GPS is like really taken off as like this is how we get everywhere. And we're out in the middle of nowhere. My brother is driving us, and he turns off the highway down this road to like through this forested area, and we have no service. We're not sure what's going on. Like our parents aren't going to be in town for another 2 to 3 days. So nobody is waiting for us to get home. Nobody is waiting to get a call from us. And we're driving down this like lane, and we pull up, and I promise you this, like you can call my brother or my sister that this happened. We pull up, and like we come through this clearing, and on the left side of us, there's this like river creek area, and there's this sort of like Gothic castle almost. I'm not even joking, with like there's like a gate, and there's this gate that's blocking this like house castle sort of thing, and there's gargoyles on the gates of the castle, and there are like crazy expensive sports cars in like you can see like beyond the gate, and the road ends like right as we see this, and there's fog like going all like across the road, and it says road ends, turn back now sign on it. And my brother, we're driving this probably like 1992 Pontiac whatever, and I mean we just started flipping out. It legit felt like we were like transported to like an alternate reality. And we got back to the house, and like I think my brother just sped the opposite direction. But it was really one of those moments of like, we've seen so many bad horror movies, and this is certainly the beginning of a bad horror movie. Nobody knows where we are, and nobody's going to come looking for at least 2 to 3 days. So that's a kind of funny story that I have.
Wow. That's good. Yeah, for me, it's a very different dynamic, but so I've been in the Army for about 3 days. I've been in basic training about 3 days. And the sergeant rushes onto stage, interrupts what we're doing, and says, the United States has declared war on Panama, and we are going in mass. And he was dead serious, and he said they are going to fast track all of basic training. They were going to train us for 4 more days. And we, because of our role, I was a Cav Scout, we were going to be one of the first ones to hit the beach. And we were going in, and he thinks we can do it. But because of the nature of how few days we'd been there, the President of the United States was giving us an opt-out option. And so in order to take advantage of that opt-out option, you had to get up from your seat, head to the back of this hall. There's 200 men in this hall. Go to the back of this hall. You'd go out a door. You'd sign the papers. You'd grab your stuff. You'd get on a bus, and you'd be out of the Army. And keep in mind, I was terrified to be in the Army. And so I was 1,000 times more terrified that I would be dead, because I had this running view of myself, and still do. Like, for example, if we were to go paintball today, I would know you would be victorious, and I would end up with welts all over my body. That's just a common thought, because no matter how much I try, I would be the guy that died. But
You want to go paintballing later?
yeah. So you're like, I finally found someone, my perfect partner. Anyway, and so when they said get up, I mean, he was like, you got to do it right now. And he was shouting, and there were a bunch of people yelling. And so, I mean, the room became over halfway deserted. And I am looking around, and so my level of fear is escalating, but I could not let go because I was like, I'm here for the college money.
Yeah.
And so anyways, so then after that played out for, it seemed like a decade, but it was probably, 45 solid seconds, they brought all those guys back up that left and put them on the stage. Now, I think they were shocked that so many were there because it's hard to shame, 60% of your group.
Yeah.
And so it died on arrival in terms of their trick. But their whole point was you got to make a decision. You're going to meet a foxhole with this guy. And it took me a few days to realize we weren't going to war with Panama. Like we did have a Panama skirmish during the time, but you got to keep in mind we were totally cut off from all information.
Gotcha.
When the Berlin Wall fell, we didn't know it till 2 days later.
That's crazy.
So
because I think that would be obviously, like I wouldn't be on my phone in that situation, but that would be my first thing. Like that, I feel like we would have heard something. Like I feel like there would have been some. I don't know.
Right.
So
No, exactly.
I like that.
And they were having a deal with a guy named Noriega. But see, I was in the Army, so I don't know what happened at all, So anyway.
Just point, fire, and miss. That's
fine. Well, mine was point, and I can't believe I've already shot.
Hello, my name is Connor.
And I'm Jason.
And you're listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast. Today, we're kind of finishing up part 2 of some of the work that we've been doing in John chapter 12. And so, yeah, if you want to turn there with us or just listen to my dulcet tones, I know that don't get too focused because they can hypnotize you. And if you're driving, that's not super good. So John chapter 12, verses 27 through 32, and this is Jesus speaking. Now my soul is troubled, and what shall I say? Father, save me from this hour? No, it was for this very reason I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name. Then a voice came from heaven. I have glorified it and will glorify it again. The crowd that was there and heard it said that it had thundered. Others had said an angel had spoken to him. Jesus said, this voice was for your benefit, not mine. Now is the time for judgment on this world. Now the prince of this world will be driven out, and I, when I am lifted up from this earth, will draw all people to myself. So, Jason, what amazes you about this passage?
Especially in context of Jesus having this earlier conversation that we talked about last week about everybody, you have to die to yourself to live. It occurs to me that Andrew and Philip and all the other apostles and everybody there, but specifically them, they are still at this point putting this Jesus thing together. Not just Jesus as the man in front of them, but this idea of him being the Messiah and what that means. And it amazes me, probably in layered ways, but this idea of him, he's the seed. It just amazes me that he's the seed. Now, the reason why I think it's funny I'm coming to this is I'm so used to this. Well, of course, Jesus is the seed that's fallen on the ground, that he'll die, and then everybody will live. But they didn't know that. Mm-hmm. And this is such an amazing message that Jesus is saying, that seed I was just talking to you about, I'm the seed. Now, it's not that we're not the seed, and not that the principle doesn't exist, but he's the seed of all seed. And especially if you attach it back to Genesis 3, and if you know much about Genesis 3 is the fall of man. And when God is cursing the serpent, he said, this woman's seed, singular, not her offspring in general, but there is a seed that will crush your head. And Jesus is saying there, this seed I was talking about, I'm the one that's going to die. I'm the one that's going to... So he's fulfilling these 1,000 years of prophecy, bam, in this instant. And I guess what equally amazes me is, and nobody gets it.
Yeah.
They're interested in this loud sound. There's no sense they made it out. Some think there's talking they heard, but there's no sense they heard the message. But it is this idea that they are amazed by the wrong things. I'm amazed that they're amazed by the wrong things. Mm-hmm. And then I ask myself, what is it I'm not amazed by right now?
Yes.
That God is like, do you not? And I don't think he's petty, but he's like, hey, I want you to see this. And I'm like, but look at the shiny. I'm the raccoon in the story.
The disciples, they took basically took a 3-year course on, how to be a Jesus person. And 3 years in, it's a full basically graduate program, and they're still not getting it. And I wonder, what you said there kind of sparked this in my brain. Like you said, are there things where I've got this part down, I've taken this class, I know the whole process, And God's like, yeah, but you're missing the fuller picture. Like you're missing like the overarching theme of it all. I wonder if you were walking, like let's say, you were going to disciple somebody who was, first coming, like you had just kind of shown the initial interest in faith in Jesus, and you spent, let's just say 6 months with them and like just trying to like hammer down the basics, and they just were not getting it. Like they had grown up outside of church. They'd grown up outside of, the normal influence of seekers that we usually find. But they just 6 months in, they just can't get it. They're not understanding it. Like you're saying things, you feel like you're being pretty direct, and they're just misinterpreting. They're just almost, it looks like willfully like ignoring what you're going to say. How do you feel 6 months into that relationship with this person?
So frustrated. Even you talking, I'm like, just come to the point where they understand in your story. Like I don't even want to wait in your story for them to come to understand. But yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I wonder. We talk about this all the time about the things that we continue to discover, in Scripture, and the things that keep being unveiled to us, even if we've read a passage, hundreds and hundreds of times. I do wonder if there's a through line here of, like, I believe the whole Bible is a story that is leading to Jesus, through Jesus, and for Jesus. And there are certain parts, like I know, like I have my Bible open on my phone right now, but I know there are parts that are like just stacked throughout here. Certain things that are going to blow my mind and change the way I view everything, that if I live for long enough, I know that I'm going to experience those things. And I wonder, I think this is where I think you were kind of going, is I have this judgment for the disciples of like, just dig a little deeper, dig a little deeper. And I wonder if they would say the same thing. Like you have all these gospels, you have the whole Old Testament, like you have it at your fingertips. And like, like I know that there are depths to plumb, and I don't know, it's all part of the journey, but I don't know.
Yeah, I totally resonate with that. And yeah, you're right. It does come with judgment. When I say I'm amazed, there's a little bit of mocking, in my perspective, because they are not getting it. They're still working on, and I keep going back to Andrew and Philip. Are they still like saying, "Hey, we're trying to get the Greeks to Jesus"? Is that we don't know, because it kind of just disappears into the netherworld here. But and if netherworld has some negative meaning, I don't mean that. But it's just the idea that that we are. It's just this weird situation that multiple things are happening, and the takeaway is the most amazing thing, really, even over the voice from the sky, is this dynamic of Jesus just specifically is predicting, I will die by being lifted up. And I think culturally they would have even, how does a person die and lifted up?
Yeah, that's a good thought.
That's crucifixion,
Yeah,
and
or that's at the very end of the age.
Right.
So what you just said there sparked another thing in my mind. Jesus, so this voice thunders from the heavens, and all these people look around and hear it, and there's still this picture of them not fully understanding what's going on. And Jesus says that this is for you. This is not for me. This is completely for your benefit. And I think, how often do you or me or you listener do something for somebody that you love, and Jesus loves these people, and they don't recognize it? And how upset does that make you feel? Like for me, I know I am no more petty than when I choose to come home and serve my wife by like doing all the dishes. And if she doesn't notice it, it's like that spark of goodness that I had, that I was doing this all for her, is revealed to be false, that it wasn't all for her. But I think this is so incredible of Jesus, that he is not, that he's doing all this for them and they're still not getting it. And like, I feel like I have never gone to the extent that Jesus has gone to, like, or that he will go to on the cross. But like, I certainly have never done anything as incredible as like give a sign like Jesus gives here. And I think, man, that helps me frame, when I'm trying to serve, when I'm trying to lay my life down for people, there's so much often this moment of clarification of when it's not appreciated or it's not seen as useful, that it's revealed to me that it's actually not my life, giving my life for them. It's almost sometimes a performance by me. And so that's very convicting.
That is. And I feel that in the same way in marriage. Another way I feel it is when I'm working towards something in my leadership with the church I get to be a part of, and other people don't see it. And I'm like, I get you don't see it, but can you stay with it? And they're like, no, we're leaving because we don't see it.
Mm-hmm.
Or they're afraid of something. I'm saying, I think that's coming from your fear, but that's not where this leads. And like, no, we're out. Mm-hmm. And it just, man, it breaks my heart. But it also, I experience a lot of anger over it because I feel betrayed. Yeah. I'm like, didn't you trust me? Didn't you trust that I was and it's not that I'm foolproof, but I'm like, I had a vision for this and this is going somewhere, and I know it made you feel uncomfortable at first, but can you keep walking through? And then I turn around and meet a God, and God's like, didn't you trust me? And
yeah.
I'm like, don't. Of course I'm not trusting you. And then I'm like, wait a minute. I've got a lot to learn here in closing that gap, I guess.
I know that feeling you're talking about, and it's particularly convicting, right? Because like, people have and we all distrust God at times, and we talked a lot about that before. But we have like I love you, Jason. You're one of my favorite people in the world. But like, I can find a lot of reasons to distrust you on something. I can find a lot of reasons to not trust you in something.
Right.
And I have, I necessarily can't find those with Jesus. Like those don't exist. And so, man, I think it gives me, if you distrust me in something. And like, I think it can help me give more grace in that situation, because I'm like, well, if I struggle with trusting Jesus, why wouldn't Jason struggle with trusting me? Like, and I'm not saying that lets us off the hook of not trusting and putting ourselves in the hands of other believers and giving ourselves up. But I think it can help put a better perspective on it.
That perspective shift is so important, and it can be applied so many ways, but specifically to this, I will have so much judgment about somebody. Why don't you trust God? Why don't you trust me in this? Which is the point you're making. And then I turn around and be like, but I don't even trust God. Like that should build in compassion and mercy.
Yeah.
And I think it does little by little, as God takes more of me over as I let him. But it is that part that is very convicting. So for you, when you look at this, what amazes you?
That's good. I thought I was going to have to redirect, but you were already on top of it.
I'm redirecting the heck out of this thing.
So what amazes me about this passage is Jesus in verse 27. He's just been talking about how he's going to have to give up his life for this goal, for this movement, for what he is after, and he's doing it for his followers, for the people he loves. And in 27, there's this lament almost that Jesus says, now my soul is troubled. What shall I say? Father, save me from this hour. No, it was for this reason I came to this hour. Now, I don't know about you, and we can talk about some of the things that Jesus says on the cross or in Gethsemane. I think it is so incredible that we have a God that doesn't portray what he does as just no big deal. Yeah, give your life up. It's nothing. I mean, I think I've been sold this bill of goods at times of like, yeah, just give everything up for Jesus and follow him, and it is what it is. There's, like, it's almost like the perspective that I think so many people have said of like, well, either you choose to follow Jesus or you choose to go to hell. And what I think is so moving for me about this passage, about how Jesus processes his demise, is that his processing of this gives me permission to not feel guilt over the struggle. The fact that Jesus, it's not just this quick and easy, this is just matter of fact. Yeah, of course I'm going to die. Of course I'm going to suffer. It is what it is. No, Jesus has to actually wrestle with it, and he actually doesn't want to do it. And I think, it's so basic, but it's so important that when we talk about ourselves or we talk about leading other people to Jesus, and like, does Jesus offer life and joy and abundance and like ultimate fulfillment? Like, of course he does. Of course there's amazing things that come alongside Jesus, but it's not easy to make those decisions in the moment. And I think that, like we talk about so much, it's just a perspective change. It's just a flip in how you view things. But I think it's so important because it gives us grace, and it gives other people grace, and it also sets up people better to not fail, right? If we tell people that, hey, follow Jesus, everything's going to be okay, everything's going to be good, he's this really great guy, and yeah, you might have to die to yourself, but it's really not that hard. But no, if we present a God that says die to yourself and you're not going to want to, it's going to be really hard to give up your life, but ultimately it's worth it in the end. That is a completely different message than I feel like a lot of people are receiving.
That is really good, and I think really tapping into why is it that we give up on Jesus? And I think it's often not because we stop believing he is the Son of God, or we stop believing that God is the God of all creation and he's all loving and all knowing and all powerful. I think it's because we convince ourselves that we're just not cut out for it. And I think it has something to do, I think a contributing factor is the very message you're saying, is that you look out and you're like, whoever your spiritual giant is in your life, whoever is the person that is your mentor, your most influential person, there's a temptation attached there, unless they are vulnerable with you, to think it just comes easy for them. Mm-hmm. Which means if you're a spiritual person, truly, then it'll come easy for you.
Yeah.
But then if it doesn't come easy for you, then you have some other calculating to do. Well, and I think that's where we give up.
Yeah, and I think that, going back to the very beginning of the podcast, the reason I talked about my doubt and my struggle and belief at times is because for so long I felt alone in that battle. And I think since then we've heard so many people, like, to you, Jason, or to me and Hannah, just reach out and talk about how big it was for them to hear somebody who, was in the professional ministry role, professional Jesus person role, to be able to be open and saying that.
I think the key and what you're saying is so powerful is that recognize, and this goes back to our first podcast, I think, or maybe our second podcast. It's our second podcast where we're talking about John the Baptist. We have to keep reminding ourselves that these heroes of faith struggled with their faith, struggled with their relationship with God every day. Mm-hmm. Every day. I, Jason Thornton, a minister, struggle with my faith every day. What does that mean? It doesn't mean I have to, I don't even believe in God today at all. Mm-hmm. It means, to me at least, it means here's how I think God would work. It's not working. Or here's how I think I should be working and I'm not working.
Yeah.
And so it just puts me into this tension. It's not even so much a struggle with God as struggling with these attacks of the devil, you know? And that's where I feel this resonates with me, at least, is this idea that you're talking about is Jesus is troubled by this, and I am troubled by the dynamics I'm dealing with. Stuff I create, stuff I see, stuff I inherit from others, that I also experience this inner turmoil, which the whole point, the bottom line is it is not easy to walk with Christ.
Yeah.
And that's the impression we're pushing back against, is this impression that, well, if you really love Jesus, this comes easy. That's the same thing as if you really love this person you're about to marry, you'll have a fairy tale marriage. Yeah. And that is the number one predictor of you getting a divorce, is thinking you'll just marry this person and it will flow smooth. No relationship works like that, including your relationship with God.
It's the idea that struggle is some sort of taint, right? That when we struggle with something, yes, it infects whatever we're working with. And I think the message that we see throughout the Bible with all the various people, including Jesus himself, is that God is found in the struggle, and that it's something that he's baked into the cake. Mm-hmm. Like he has purposely made it this way. And we can talk about why would he do it, or why, wow, it's so amazing. But I think so much of the time we view this, and maybe it has something to do with the purity culture, that like if we have anything inside of us that isn't remotely what we think it should be, then it necessarily is sinful. But listen, if Jesus was sinless, which we believe that he was sinless, Jesus struggled and had inner turmoil about this. So that necessarily means that having inner turmoil, but ultimately choosing God, ultimately choosing to give yourself up and sacrifice, that's about as holy as it can be. And man, I think that's so big, because I think for a lot of people, they've received the message that to struggle, to have what they would see as the taint of struggle, is sin in of itself. And if you can't fix that sin, then you can't even begin to do anything else.
Oh man, I could go all day. Only respecting all of our time would I not, but we need to just hold this out in front of us. What do we do with our guilt, and what do we do with habitual sin, and what do we do with these things? Because those answers are in Scripture, but they have largely not been processed in public in our churches and our preaching, and part of it is simply because it just becomes too messy too fast.
Yeah.
And most church structures want it to be clean. want it to be, we tell you the truth, you agree to do it, and never tell us otherwise.
And that's why people get the idea that the lack of cleanliness is wrong and sinful. And so when people go to church and they never hear it processed, never hear it talked about, never hear it preached on, then for them it just becomes this, oh, well, if it's not being addressed in church, then there must be something inherently wrong, not with the sin. I mean, yes, something wrong with the habitual sin, but there's something wrong with the struggle. There's something wrong that this would even be an issue in my mind. This would even be a struggle in my mind. Yeah.
Right.
I love that.
And that's the distinction you're drawing. And I think this is really important to just reinforce. Sin is a problem. Sin kills us. Sin drags us away from God. Sin is an invitation not to trust God with some aspect of your life. We're not talking about sin or trying to minimize sin. What we're saying is struggling with it has been tainted so much. That's the taint you're speaking of. Yeah. And I just want to make sure this is clear. And Jesus is struggling here and not sinning. And that's important. So your struggle may not be sin. And so that's this. We're not specifically digging into all the figuring out how to, diagnose that. But I do think it's important that we point that out, what we're talking about. So for you with that, see, because now that we're reflecting on what amazes us, I'm like, all those things perplex me too.
Yeah,
like there's some
for sure.
But if we're trying to hone in on one thing that perplexes you, what is one thing about this that perplexes you? Sure.
So in 32, when Jesus is talking about the judgment of the world and how the prince of the world will be driven out, he says, and when I'm lifted up from the earth, I will draw all people to myself. Man, that leads to a lot of questions. Anybody that acts, and I think we've done, Jason and I have talked about this a lot. Anybody who acts like the afterlife, or who's saved, who isn't, who gets into the party, who doesn't get into the party, anybody who acts like it's like really cut and dry and super easy to address, I think that's foolish. I think there are people that I know who are like firmly on the side of there are very few people, like they're, like only the people in my church get into heaven sort of people. I've heard them talk about this passage and be like, well, we really don't 100% know what Jesus means by the word all here. And so I think the perplexing thing for me is this continual ambiguity in this topic. And maybe I'm not framing in the right way. Maybe I'm not processing in the right way, but this is just this continual perplexing thing for me. Because honestly, I would love to just take this like this passage, and that would just be my whole theological, like this would be the only thing I'd build my theological afterlife judgment on, and just be like, okay, everybody, all people, not just all disciples or all believers, but I would love to build what I believe just off of this only verse here. But then there's just so much other stuff to take in.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing you say is, you're saying, how does Jesus say all? And then humanity says, yeah, all of the people I think.
Yeah.
And that's the perplexing dynamic, is how has humanity read this and missed it? Well, not people of this color, well, not people of this, strata, not people of this caste, or this level or whatever, And I think this is the challenge. And of course I flip it around on me, and I'm saying, who am I counting out in my life? You know what I mean? Who is it? Maybe, and a lot of times we go to, well, what's your blind spot? And that's fair. I could tell you my blind spots with people groups in general, but I even think about who are the people in my life that I'm like, this person just will never grow. That I'm like, wait a minute. So here's the part that I'm going to build on that perplexes me, with everybody coming, that when Jesus raised up, he's coming. Now, he's talking specifically, and I'm open to correction here. He's saying, look, judgment, now is the time, and I'm going to be lifted up and draw them into me. So you're thinking Jesus is on a cross, and then all people come to him forever and ever. Okay. So then I've heard this text used as, so if we lift Jesus up, then we will draw people to think about it as a church or a group of believers. If we lift Jesus up and keep lifting Jesus up, we will draw all people to us. So man, lots of things spin out of this for me, but one of them is, what if I'm doing my best to lift Jesus up and no one is coming? And I think it's one of those things that you step back and you're like, okay, God, help me with this. Help me think through this. On one hand, it could be that I think I'm lifting Jesus up, but I'm really lifting me up. Or I'm really lifting my favorite doctrine up, or I'm really lifting my interpretation up, And there is a big difference between my interpretation and lifting Jesus up. The other thing, though, is that's interesting, and if you make this what God's saying here is over the complete span of time, people are coming to him. You lifting him up doesn't guarantee that all people will come to you. And the reason I say this is I always think Peter and Paul, and we studied Acts pretty in depth together, a few years ago, and this kept coming up, is I just always wonder if Paul, when he goes and preaches for the first, second, 15th time, if he's not saying, where's my Pentecost? Peter and the other apostles raised Jesus up, and 3,000 people came to be baptized. Not just 3,000 people came, but 3,000 people were baptized. I raised Jesus up, and I get stoned. I raised Jesus up, and people are like, we don't care. I raised Jesus up. People are like, why don't you come back next week and talk to us? I get a handful of people in all these cities, and I think it's important. I don't know what is the application of this in my life.
Sure,
is the perplexing dynamic. Like, I'm not quite sure how to apply this well.
This kind of gets back to part of the earlier conversation we had about people we perceive as giants in the faith. It kind of that's where you're kind of going. Kind of draws me to. I feel like sometimes as Jesus people, we have this sense, like we know, okay, God has set out my work for me, right? God has made a path for me, and He has plans for me, and He has a plan for me and work for me to do here. And even though we know theologically, biblically, that those things are even, so if I'm following my plan, if I'm living out the calling that God has on my life, and you're living out the calling on, God has in your life, then man, we're drawing all people to Him. We're building the kingdom. We're participating in equal fashion. I feel like the struggle we talk about here is when the outward results don't match what we think they should be on the inside. So that when we're both living out the calling that God has placed in our life, and you're leading a church of 3,000 people, and I'm struggling to pay the bills with 50 people, in my church. What I wonder, is it an issue of what we perceive as success, right? And so what do we naturally have this idea that, of course, I'm going to be Peter at Pentecost. Of course, like, if God has a plan for me, and if God is going to draw all people to Him, well, of course I'm going to play, the part where I get the high numbers, or I get the, whatever. Or I wonder, I love what you said about Paul, and it's something that I've processed a lot. I wonder if there would have been a moment for Paul to be like, if you could trade the ministry results that you've had with Peter, would you do it? And I wonder if in Paul's heart of hearts, he would, like, seeing Pentecost and seeing the fruit of it and seeing all of that happen, if in a vulnerable moment, if he would be like, yeah, I would really wish I could see some of that. And what I love about that example, and we can't know for sure, and this is just kind of us working through some things, but then you fast forward 2,000 years later, and the role that Paul plays in drawing men to Jesus, it's incredible. I mean, it far outreaches just the few thousand people that Peter initially, interacts with or baptizes at Pentecost. I don't know. What you said is really interesting to me.
I was in a training program. Lots of good in this training program. Periodically, they'd bring in missionaries. And this is just an example of the messaging, unintentional or otherwise. And I've got a worse, more grotesque example, but I'm going to stay with this one. I'm going to hold that in my back pocket unless you ask me a question about that in the future, or in case you did.
What's a grotesque thing a missionary said, did, or trained?
This preacher. Anyway, I'll save it.
Okay.
Build our tension for the future. Anyway, because that's something you're looking for, is more tension.
We're gonna get a T-shirts printed out that say A&P. Grotesque missionary ? Yes, I don't know.
I like where this goes. Anyway, so the first missionary, there's missionaries like 4 days in a row. The first missionary was from Northeast United States, and he said, "Man, if you're not Northeast United States, are you really doing anything? Do you really love this country? Do you really love this world? Do you really love the lost?" Next day, a guy comes in from Brazil, and same message. In Brazil, the people in Brazil are really responding. Do you really love people? Next day, China. Do you really? And I was working with students that were hearing this, young college-age students that were hearing this. And I remember when they came down on the first day, there were several like, why are we even here? Why are we not in the Northeast United States? We ought to be up in Connecticut or wherever, And the next day, it's like, oh man, no, we need to be in Brazil. But by day 3, they're completely disenchanted. Because if they were such stupid imbeciles that they had just gone off to Northeast United States, they would have really missed God's calling to go down to Brazil. But then they would have been in Brazil and been such completely incompetent followers of Christ because they should have been in China. And this was not intentional to the missionaries' messaging. But I think this is the message you can get from church, especially when you bring in somebody that's been, quote, successful, is that if you are you're going to your job, and you're working as hard as you can, not just to be good at your job, but to show Christ in interactions. And you periodically reach out to a coworker, and you're loving them, and you're known as somebody that loves them around the office, but no one will come to church with you. And that one time you said, hey, does anybody want to study the Bible? It was met with ridicule. And you're doing your best to raise your family, but man, it feels like your kids, you don't even know if they really love God. It's a wrestle to get them to church. And then you hear these messages that says, well, what you really need to do is be in, China and you need to be in Brazil. And it's not the heart of those men that were speaking is not bad. It's their desire was good. They're making appeal for people they loved. I get that. But the takeaway is, if you're not Peter at Pentecost, are you really even walking with Christ? And you hear that message more than a few times, and you may still go to church because you believe you need to, and you're still trying your best to believe in God, but you're going to stop actively believing that God's using you if the standard is you must be impacting as many people as I am.
Well, I think, I'm going to use you for an example. I think it could be very easy. You have a ministry where you work with, at a middle school in an underprivileged area. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And you work with these young men, and you are this healthy male presence, healthy, godly male presence in their life. And if you know anything about the statistics of how beneficial health, not even godly, but healthy male presences are in young men's life, I think you could easily say you are literally changing the course of lives, not just their lives, but their kids' lives and the relationship that they're going to have. I think very easily when you get wrapped up into that work, you could say there's no greater work in Tulsa. There's no greater work to be done here. And even just in our little area, there's so many good things happening that are involved with churches and not involved with churches. I used to take my youth group down to Nightlight, which is an under the bridge ministry that ministers to homeless people. And they're just constant warriors, constant just giving themselves over and over and over for these people that need their help. And I think it'd just be so easy to go, well, if you're not under the bridge, if you haven't dedicated every Thursday night, which is when they meet, every Thursday night of your week, of your life, then what is it about? Like, what are you even doing? And I think sometimes we use this as an excuse to not do anything, to not engage, to not give back. But I think the issue becomes is when we are really passionate about, working with males who need young males who need healthy, manly presences in their life, or working with people who are homeless, or working with widows or orphans, or working with whoever you're working with, whatever you're passionate about. The struggle is always going to naturally be that is going to become your religion. That's going to become the God that you hold up, that you worship. And it's so easy to look at other people's success, right? When I look at other people's passions for these things and go, oh man, that's the essence, right? That's what I'm chasing. I'm chasing that fulfillment, that joy, whatever it is I see them getting out of it. And I think the thing that we have to keep reminding ourselves, both for our judgment towards ourselves and a judgment towards other people that we maybe perceive as not doing the things that we think they should be doing, or participating in the way they should be participating, is that the manifestations of the passions that I have for Jesus aren't Jesus.
That is so well said. And part of the strain in trying to verbalize all this is it's so tightly woven together. In my life, I have been told if you are not working on legislation against same-sex marriage, you don't love Jesus. If you do not have foster children, you don't love Jesus. If you are not going to abortion clinics and stopping women from getting abortions, you don't love Jesus. If you don't worship in the way that we're telling you to, you don't love Jesus. And it's just one of these dynamics. And then I flip it around where I'm the person. What are my choice things? Well, if you don't join me at this middle school, if you don't come to my church, if you don't believe this particular way I'm saying things, and this is how the devil works us. He either gets us, he wants us either to feel like we're on the outside looking in, I wish I was more like that, or we're on the inside looking out. I wish they were better,
Yeah.
And or look how good I am. And we have to realize he does this in every area of our life, including our passions for Jesus. He wants to take everything we've got that's good and just make it pseudo, make it something a little bit different than worshiping God with. No matter how good, how many people love their families so much and they've completely blocked Christians and they've completely blocked God out of their families, and that becomes their idol. And I think this is the nature of the spiritual battle we're a part of. So back to Jesus in this context, it's fascinating then to jump back to this and see him troubled with this place that God's put him in, and he put himself in as this seed that's going to die, and then simultaneously trying to encourage these people. It is a funny thing, and man, we could do another 30 minutes on why have a voice for them. This voice wasn't for me. Like, you asked for something, God does something, he says, not for me, and I'm like, what? It's not for you. And then it seems like they're not understanding it, or at least they're not making the connection it's from God. This whole thing. So in the middle of, he is so passionate about dying for himself, God provides this thing, and then he says, this was for you. They don't get his passion. And then we know for a fact, and we can dig deeper into this text for you to go further. Jesus, like you said earlier, he loves these people. He's not mad at them. He's able to be troubled, and it drives him to passion, and the people don't get his passion, and he still loves them. And that's the picture for me, is like, okay.
So
okay.
You said something there that really sparked something in my mind. I have such a drive to be understood and understood completely. It's so important to me that I am understood, that people know where I'm coming from, that I love to be understood and to be seen for who I am and for who God has made me. I think that's good, and I think that's important. And yet, for Jesus is not seen for who he is. He's not understood, and he's the thing that I constantly rage against in my heart and in my soul. Jesus is experiencing so fully here, and that's amazing to me, and it's perplexing to me.
So in considering all this, here is what really strikes me. In 27, I can so relate to this. My soul is troubled. I can so relate to that. I can so relate to saying, Father, I'm considering asking you to help me avoid what it is you want me to do. I can certainly relate to that. Am I saying save me from this hour? I'm like, yeah, I thought about that. I don't want to do this. I don't want to have to do this work or experience this conflict or whatever it is. And then I can even imagine the conclusion of, no, it was for this very reason. No, this is why I'm here. I'm here to do this hard work. I've been in lots of situations where I was called into something. I didn't want to do it, but I felt like God wanted me there, and I was troubled by it, and I was like, okay, God. And then I'm like, no, this is what I'm supposed to do. But this next sentence where he says, Father, glorify your name, it's interesting because I go the other direction. I go to, Father, make sure my work isn't in vain.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, Father, glorify your name. And what's fascinating is God says, he said, I have glorified it and will glorify it again. The people don't get it. And Jesus is left with, hey, this is for you, not for me.
Yeah.
But my job is still going to be, I'm going to go die, and it will bring life to everybody. Yeah. And he accomplished it. They no matter what they thought, thunder or an angel, and then Jesus put a mark on it. That was God. That was for you from God. It accomplished it. But on his personal level, just like we would both relate to, he wanted to be understood. but he gave it up for a greater good. And this is important. God never asks you to give up sin for the sake of looking good or for the sake of having a cleaner life. He asks you to give up sin to bring glory to him. Mm-hmm. And so even if you're like, but I've only given up 1/15 of my sin, great. That brings glory to God, you know? And that's the thing that I think really I want to keep growing in is this idea, okay, I did the best I could. I thought it went well. I thought it failed. Whatever. God, let your name be glorified.
Thank you for listening to the Amazed and Perplexed podcast. If you want to get in contact with us, you can email us at amazedandperplexed@gmail.com. You can fill out a contact form at amazedandperplexed.com. You could reach out via Facebook message. You could shout at us on the street. You can call Jason at 2 a.m. in the morning.
Yes.
Whatever you need, we are here. Grace, peace, and love.